Okay, so if any of you noticed the title of my talk, I hope it didn't scare people off. But I want to share with you. Actually, it's the first time I've ever tried to do this work and present something about one of the major. Well, not the first time about one of the major prophets, but I've never talked about Ezekiel before. And some of us that were in high school choir decades ago probably sang a song about one of Ezekiel's visions. Anybody know what it was? Ezekiel saw the wheel way up in the middle of the air, a wheel in a wheel way in the middle of the air. Well, I'm not going to talk about that one, but let me tell you about Ezekiel, and then I'm going to tell you about this vision, and then I'm going to explain it, at least from a metaphysical perspective. So Ezekiel was from Judah, which was the portion of that part of the world that was practicing Yahwism, the Jewishness of the time, belief in one God. And about 6 centuries before the birth of Christ, I tell you that so you can get a sense of the history here. So it was quite a long time before the birth of Christ. He and all of these, I will call them Jewish people, Jews, even though they weren't using that title at that point, but it's just easier. He and all of these people were gathered together in what became to be known as Judah, and they had the temple there, and they were very committed to their faith in Yahweh, one God, and they were very committed to their practices. And a king from a neighboring territory decided that he wanted their land. It's straight out of today's headlines. I kid you not. This king was named Nebuchadnezzar. You've probably heard of him based on um, Daniel in the lion's den. Nebuchadnezzar was responsible for that horror, um, and many other atrocities and crimes against people. So Nebuchadnezzar decided he wanted the land of Judah. And so he, with his army of soldiers, went in and invaded this country and started killing people and capturing them and kidnapping them and physically taking them hundreds of miles away from their homes and families and livelihoods. It was a terrifying time, and the several sections in our Hebrew scriptures talk about this. And he took them to a place called Babylon. You've heard of Babylon, Babylon. And Babylon is referred to in the scriptures throughout all the scriptures. And there's a whole lot of ugly stuff about Babylon in the revelation of John. And I'm not going there. I just want you to know Babylon was a big city, very wealthy, um, had been a big city for centuries before Ezekiel came along. So all of these faithful people, faithful to God, they were killed, they were kidnapped, and especially it's kind of like in Nazi Germany, they especially kidnapped the people with the most education and the most skills to take them to Babylon, where Nebuchadnezzar had his kingdom and his throne and his pagan worship areas. So many of the major prophets in the Hebrew scriptures were written about that whole period of time and the hundreds of years that the folks were abandoned, if you will, in Babylon, and they had to work. It's kind of like the exile and of the Jewish people from when they were kidnapped and taken to Egypt, and they were enslaved for there. And we've all heard of, I expect, we've all heard of that exile. That one's pretty famous. And we've probably heard of Babylon, but maybe didn't realize what it was. So Babylon was also a major time of exile for the Jewish people. And they weren't allowed to worship the way they believed. And it was a long, horrible time for generations and generations. So many of the prophets that we call prophets, it's not like they were foreseeing the future. It's just like they had a calling, and they had a sense of God's presence in their lives that they felt compelled to share with people, that God has not forgotten us, that the God that we love is with us, and don't give up your faith. And so Ezekiel was one of these prophets. In the scriptures, whenever you hear about Babylon, and like there's this really poignant psalm that says, by the waters of Babylon, we sat down and wept. And the people that would have heard David offering that song, that prayer, they knew exactly what it meant. Because it was such a time of horror and fear and anguish and grief and hopelessness. So Ezekiel was writing about that time and trying to offer some sort of guidance and strength to these people that had felt so abused and abandoned and so frightened and so immersed in sorrow from everything that had happened. So one of the things about the prophets, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, um, Jonah, there's many of the scriptures in the Hebrew scriptures are from prophets, but they're trying to help people understand that God is still with them, that the great the I am who I am, has not abandoned them. And so many people at that point believed that their presence with the divine was tied to living in a particular place or worshiping in a particular building or worshiping with particular formulas. And so they felt as though when they had been kidnapped and taken into slavery, they felt as though God probably had abandoned them because they had left God back in Judah. So I don't really suggest that you start reading the prophets. It's really difficult reading, but there's hints of hope and stuff in it that we can understand from our perspective. And Ezekiel wanted to offer hope to these folks, and then he had these very bizarre visions, and one of them was the wheel and a wheel, and it was, oh my goodness, what a vision. There were monsters and angels with all kinds of odd, speaking of Halloween, all kinds of odd faces and mannerisms and so forth and so on. So I'm not going to talk about that one. I'm going to talk about another one that you've also heard a song about. Anybody know which one it is? Jody and Zach, do you know what it is? You don't know. Okay. The Bones. The Bones. Let's see. I forgot the song. um, the toe bone's connected to the foot bone's connected to the ankle bone's connected to the leg bone. Now hear the word of the Lord. Them bones, them dry bones, them bones, them bones, them dry bones, them bones, them bones, them dry bones. Now hear the word of the Lord. So that was one of Ezekiel's odd visions. And what he described was that he saw mountains of human bones in this big field. And I saw recently, which just gave me chills, and I've seen this before in person, but I saw a video about the Holocaust Museum. And if you've been there, you know there's some gigantic cases filled with human bones. So Ezekiel saw this field of bones, and somehow he knew that they were bones of soldiers, and they were scattered all over, and they were clearly bones that had been out in the sun and the wind for a long time. He said the bones were completely desiccated, completely dried up. And he heard God say to him, breathe life into the bones. Well, Ezekiel's response was the same as ours. Are you kidding me? Really? Um, and God was persistent with Ezekiel, and I don't know about you, but I'm not sure I would have continued to try to listen to them. But Ezekiel stayed faithful and listened. And and God kept saying, breathe life into the bones. And so the word for breath in Hebrew, anybody know, is, I'll spell it for you, then I'll pronounce it. It's, well, in English, transliterated into English. It's Ruach. It's pronounced ruach. It's got breath coming out of the end of the word. Ruach. It was the Holy Spirit. God said to Ezekiel, you have, as all of us have, the ability to share the Holy Spirit. They weren't using those words, Holy Spirit, yet, but you have the ability to share the holy breath with these bones and restore them to life. And anyway, the vision goes on, and the conversation between Ezekiel and God goes on, and they talk about the fact that there's no sinews, there's no muscle, and there's no skin, and eventually, with all of this, supposedly all of the bones start to knit together, and each set of bones of one particular person makes a person that's standing up, all put together. And there's hundreds of people that are just bones standing up, but they're still not alive. And God continues to say, breathe into the bones. I will make them alive. And so then the bones start moving, but they're still not alive. And finally, the bones start to become real people. And that's a vision that would probably terrify us. But Ezekiel was able to take that vision and see into it how what God was saying for Ezekiel to tell people who were in bondage, who had been kidnapped, who had lost everything. He was able to say to them, that's probably how you're feeling. You're feeling like a pile of dead, cast out, thrown away bones, without hope, without relationship, without breath, without holiness. And I need you, Ezekiel, tell the people that I have not abandoned you, that I will continue to share holiness and healing and direction with you. So I want to talk about Linda's interpretation of the metaphysical interpretation of this, which some of you probably have already figured out. There are things, even thankfully, oh, look at that cute dog. There are things, hopefully, I mean, I expect in all of our lives, we can think of times that weren't perhaps as horrifying and as isolating as what the Israelites were feeling and what the Ukrainians are feeling and what so many other refugees in our world are feeling. Hopefully, we've not had anything that awful, but we've certainly had times in our lives, maybe today, when we're feeling cast out, abandoned. Maybe hope is somewhat dried up sometimes, and we're just not sure how to recover our spirit. And one of the things that Ezekiel did that was so courageous and so life-changing was he started telling people, he told them about these visions, and he told them God has not abandoned us. No matter how dead your spirit may feel, no matter how frightened, no matter how desperate, no matter how grief-stricken you are, God is still part of you. God is still in your soul, and your soul is in God. And we don't really know how the people of Ezekiel's day responded to that, but clearly they heard the message because it continued to be shared for generations, and we still have it. And they were able to breathe new life even into themselves because they trusted divinity, divine love, divine mind, Holy Spirit, that they were not alone. They were not cast out and rejected and despised. And sometimes we just need to be reminded of that. And sometimes we need to hear something from somebody else who has experienced that sense of isolation and desolation. We hear how they have found hope and healing in the midst of all of that. And Ezekiel became one of the people that offered that hope and healing. And Ezekiel told the folks what he received from God. This message: I am and always will be your God, and you will always be my precious children. You cannot be absent from me, even if you're not aware of my presence. I am always with you. And when you feel, when parts of you, your memories, your thoughts, your relationships, your sorrows, your fears, when those parts of your life start to feel like they've just taken over and they've caused all the light in your world to go dark, don't forget. Don't forget the divine love, the divine mind, the I am who I am is always with you, is always on your side. And then Ezekiel said something else, which probably was hard for these folks to hear. And I get it. He said, the response to this is worship. The response to wherever you find yourself, however hard, however desolate, however fearful, however lonely, the response is always worship. Worship God. And that worship should consist of two main things. One is to give thanks no matter what. You know, we hear these same messages in the Christian scriptures, don't we? We hear it all the way through. Give thanks no matter what. And the second is to take care of people. Remember when a lawyer was trying to trick Jesus and he said, "What's the greatest commandment?" And you know, at that point, the Jewish people, and still today, there are hundreds of commandments in the scriptures and hundreds of commandments that are just passed down orally. What's the greatest one? And without blinking, Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and might and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus didn't make those up. He didn't write them. They came straight out of the Hebrew scriptures, both of them, word for word. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and might and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And Ezekiel said to the people who were so downcast, that were like dead, dried up bones, they had given up on life. Ezekiel said, worship God, give thanks for everything, and take care of other people. And that was the point of the vision that he somehow interpreted. And we are blessed to be with each other and blessed to have our homes and our safety and relative families and and health mostly. And you know, we're so blessed. And so give thanks. If the only prayer you ever say is thank you, that will be enough.
So would it be appropriate now to say thank you?
Always.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So if anybody else would like to say thank you, you know how to do that. It might start with unmuting your screen. Pam?
I always know that when you're going to give us a talk, first of all, that I'm going to learn something. And then second of all, that I'm going to leave feeling good, feeling peace within me, and that peace will last for quite some time. And so I really do thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
Just want to
Okay.
say ditto. She worded it beautifully. Thank you, Linda. It was wonderful. As always, I needed that.
Well,
Yeah.
I always need the message that comes to me and comes through me. I always need it before you know about it.
Well, the message coming through now is that I will call you later on to say thank you for future talks that you were thinking about giving.
You're welcome.
And Pam, I love the idea of you saying an opening in Spanish. So I may ask you to read the Daily Word again if and when you join us from weekend to weekend. So thank you for that.
Mhm.
Leon, did you want to say something? I don't know. I see your screen unmuted. You never know with you.
Well, I did want to say thank you very much, Linda, for the talk today. And um, when you bring out that the concept of the Holy Spirit has been, part of the Jewish tradition that led up to the Christian tradition, I really do appreciate that it's always been there. Wonderful talk today. Thank you.
And Linda, I was going to ask you a biblical question. The three people that were put in the fire, I, for some reason I kept thinking about Meshach, Horshack, and Abednego. Horshack got in there somehow from some sitcom. I can't remember. But who were the three? And it wasn't Nebuchadnezzar, was it?
Oh, Nebuchadnezzar was the wicked king that had them thrown in the fire.
Oh, so he did that too.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, who were the three again? What were their names? I know it wasn't Horshack.
No, it wasn't. Now
Meshach.
that you've said that, Meshach.
Meshach.
Patty Jean knows.
It's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
That's it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Shadrach. Okay.
And by the way, it's not a bend like your elbow bends. It's bedn. Bedn.
Abednego.
It's not bend like bend. It's bedn. But not that anybody cares. But yeah.
Thank you,
Could
Patty.
respond. Yeah.
Jody?
Oh, well, I again just wanted to thank you. I appreciated your your further interpretation of Ezekiel's interpretation for thousands of years later. I always feel like if you don't have hope, all the pressures when things pulling on you every day of your life, it's going to tear you apart. So seeing that, with the word hope attached to it, it's good image for me because it's the hope, the Holy Spirit. But if you have hope, you won't get torn apart in the first place. That's just my thought about that. Because I know when there's so much stuff pulling on you and you just give up, that's like you said, you give up and you're just, totally disintegrated, and you have to integrate yourself back together again. And that can sometimes take a lot of therapy.
Yeah.
But if you keep that hope, if you can somehow keep that hope, you might can prevent a lot of things that can be destructive in your life. So I appreciate
Well,
that.
you may not, and I think that's a misnomer. You may not be able to prevent them.
Mm.
I mean, I don't mean to sound belittling of anybody, but there are people that want to say, especially they want to say, if you believe in Jesus, then
Oh,
nothing
yeah.
bad will happen to you. That is just not true.
No, no.
It's terrible theology, and it's certainly not what Christ taught. So we don't want to say that if you have hope, in the Holy Spirit, nothing bad will happen to you, because that's just not true.
Right, right.
That is not.
Yeah, I
And you, I
felt
know
like,
you didn't mean it to sound that way, but
yeah,
I just
I
think
think
we need to
I
be.
worded it a different way, but you can keep the bad things that are going to happen to you from destroying you.
Yes.
That's what I really meant to
Yes.
say, that bad things are going to pull on you and they're going to pull you apart. But if you have that hope, if you have that central grounding, you may not be pulled apart into a bunch of dry bones.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
You're right.
And
Absolutely.
I knew that song because it is undoubtedly the best song for a baritone to sing. It equals all the way away in the middle of the air.
Yeah.
Oh,
The Ezekiel song, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, but thank you very much.
Frank, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just as you were talking. Now, was the Tower of Babel, was that during Nebuchadnezzar's time, or is that a
no,
different
that was centuries earlier.
centuries earlier?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, because I when I thought about it, it was like the whole story of people not being able to communicate.
Well,
Mhm,
We're there now, you know,
mhm.
that's right. And
Right.
and
that's
that's not
ex-
good.
that's why I love exploring the scriptures. No matter when they lived, what culture they lived in, what their
Mhm.
practices were, where they lived geographically, there's always something that's so relevant.
Mhm.
People need to remember that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people that say, "Oh, I don't look at the Old Testament because
Yeah.
that doesn't have anything to do with me."
It has a
That's
lot.
yeah.
There's a
I think
lot of
it's a yeah.
yeah, there's a lot of wisdom and a lot of
Mhm,
beauty.
mhm,
I
mhm.
mean, sometimes it's hard to find the beauty. I'll
Right.
give you
There's a
that.
lot of stuff going on there. Yeah.
But
But
sometimes,
it's
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard to say thank you. I mean, think of the
that's
book of
exactly
Job.
right.
I mean, Job.
Yeah.
Job, yeah.
So
I'll tell you about Job someday, but you probably know about Job. But
But
Mhm.
anytime we think we're down in the dumps, oh my God, just bring back, read the book of Job.
Right.
yeah,
But I've learned throughout Unity's teachings and the people we've had delivering messages is one of the first things you say during trauma is thank you. It's kind of a grounding. It's kind of remembering. I mean, even in Jesse's accident on the treadmill yesterday, I turned it into, well, thank God that angel was there to turn the machine off.
absolutely.
And you didn't break anything, you know.
And
So,
and that you were in the house,
Mhm.
that you weren't gone when
yeah,
it
but
happened.
that statement of Neil's in the house is not always a good one. So, according to Jesse, anyway. So, any last comments before I stop the recording? All right. Thank you so much for your message. Not just timely, but um, wor- not even worldly. I mean, it's just beyond that. You know, words sometimes are powerful, and just to thank you. Well, so